Good afternoon, everybody. We are live again, and thank you for joining us for the second in our series of webinars and podcasts focusing on utilities in the property sector. Today, we're back in the world of hotels, and we're moving on to the clean element of the utilities trilemma. Now, don't worry if you weren't there for the first episode or can't remember what the utilities trilemma is. My trusty partner in crime, Nick, will give you a quick refresher very soon. And if you do want a copy of the first webinar, please put a thumbs up in the chat section to your right. Once again, I wanted to start off with a fact to make you think. So the International Tourist Partnership, ITP's March 2020 report update focuses on 6 categories that establish a business case for sustainable hotels. Now, it might be stating the obvious, but all these categories rely on one thing in order to drive success. And that is simply data, which is lucky because that's what the subject of our clean webinar is all about. As before, please make sure that you ask questions and make comments during this webinar. We can't promise to get to them all, but we do have some members of the team ready to answer them online. If we don't get to them, we will put them in the mailbag for an extended episode for the third webinar. There will also be some polls appearing on your right. Please do make sure you vote. Once again, joining us today are a range of hotel brands from small boutique hotels, as well as some large corporate chains. You are all very welcome. Finally, please follow us on social media, and so you can keep up to date with everything energy. Search at Amber Energy. Well, once again, I'm Tim Stephen, asset manager, self-confessed customer service geek, and your host. Joining me is Nick King. Good afternoon, Nick.
Good afternoon, Tim. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Nick King. I'm a business development director at Amber Energy. I've been in the business for about 2 years now, and my focus on a day-to-day is to really support our clients grow strategically across the property sector in the UK and beyond.
Brilliant. So first things first, Nick, can you give our wonderful audience a quick refresher on the utilities trilemma before I go through some conclusions from the last webinar?
Absolutely. So I think it was important for us to kind of bring this back to life, really. So we've built out the 3 webinar series that we're going to be covering off. You can see there on the lean, clean and green points. What we covered off last time was lean, which was looking at how a green energy strategy purchasing strategy can really yield benefit from a sustainability perspective, and provide us some guidance and support about kind of validating a strategy that you may have in place, or looking to potentially buy green energy and what the implications of that could be. So that was the last session. So hopefully if you joined us on that one and you're back again today, I hope you found that useful. The second point on the trilemma is really looking at the clean side of things. So that's what we're obviously going to be focusing on today, which is how we can fully optimize an operational asset or an operational portfolio within the hotel sector. And the final point will be then looking at some of the levers and some of the interventions around green. So looking at a carbon smart hotel or an operation and what that again could potentially look like, and we'll be looking to provide some support and guidance around how to fully kind of capitalize on all of the potential opportunities of looking at that strategy for your business. The utilities trilemma is something that Amber Energy has copywritten, and we feel that this represents a really effective way of crystallizing the key challenges that organizations face when looking at running a slick operation, an efficient operation, but also looking to derive and roll out a robust sustainability strategy across the portfolio or across your site as well.
Brilliant, thanks, Nick. So that cleans up what we're going to speak about today, data-driven, based on the targets that we've set in our lean category. So just to kind of reverse back onto our conclusions from last time, we concluded that setting a goal was really important. Working backwards from that goal. So really setting out what you want to achieve in your sustainability journey. Remember, you're not alone. Everyone is on the journey, and getting started will mean you've made a really good effort to start reducing carbon, which is really, really important. One of the conclusions was also there's an opportunity to act together, the collective opportunity to act through hotel governing bodies or through companies like ourselves. And of course, Amber can support you on the journey. So the elephant in the room, since the last webinar, the world has got even more complicated. Public health issues are creating unprecedented scenarios, which we already have far-reaching consequences for businesses, none more so than you guys in the hotel and hospitality industries. At Amber, we've implemented our business continuity plan and have closed the office and hence the domestic setting. I hope you like my pictures. But it's very much business as usual for us, and we appreciate that we're quite lucky in that situation, and there are much further reaching effects for you guys. Hopefully today we'll provide you with some content to take your mind off COVID-19 and onto something a bit more bright. Someone said that data is now more valuable than oil. Today we're going to explore that value and look how it slots into our sustainability journey for hotels. So with that in mind, Nick, what do we mean by good data?
As simple as it sounds, Tim, robust streaming data that provides enough information to profile a portfolio asset and its overall performance when looking at emissions, carbon footprint, energy consumption, and more widely energy reduction as well. So I think that would be the kind of key element around good data. The second point I'd make on that as well is it allows us, or allows hotels, to create a robust baseline to target and track reduction initiatives against. So if you're specifically looking at introducing CapEx or OpEx reduction targets, and obviously having that solid view of your baseline is absolutely essential. So we can also profile it as well so that you can get much more detail around room by room data. So again, being more granular on that aspect can be quite an impactful view when considering your overall asset performance. I think historically the challenges that we've seen around good data have been kind of industry and technology led in a way, and we cover certainly technology a bit later as well. But I think from the kind of historical point of view of smart meters or AMR, some of the challenges that we saw there, certainly quite heavily publicised, that the government-led smart meter rollout programme is quite a way behind where it needs to be. So that in itself poses challenges. Smart meters typically impact the domestic side of consumers. And we still see what's called closed protocols within smart meters as well, which effectively means that every time you change domestic suppliers, you could potentially then need to look to have another smart meter installed, etc. On the commercial side, which is where obviously all of the hotels that we've got joining us today will sit, we'll have what's called AMR meters, so automated meter read meters. And they've been set up now, and they provide, historically they were able to provide one accurate bill a month for one accurate read a month for billing purposes, but now we can kind of create much more rich data from those AMR meters that are installed. So yeah, absolutely, you know, that there's definitely a much more clearer view of how sites are consuming now from the technology, etc.
Great, and of course that AMR rollout and generally the technology getting better means that we can get more granular data and quicker data. So what are the benefits of that, more granular data, Nick?
Yeah, we want to get to a point where data ideally should be as real time as we can get it, really, to understand a true view of an asset or a portfolio of hotels. And what we really want to get to at that stage as well is being able to say that we've got the granular data flowing, and the benefit really there is then you can start to be quite dynamic with that and understand things around how your asset is being used at any given time, but also set things like alerts, triggers and alarms that can be set with certain kits, certain processes or certain areas within your hotel. And again, they just provide a really, really good way of being able to manage some of the challenges if kits go offline, etc. So yeah, it's quite an important kind of area when looking at the benefits of granular data, to be honest, Tim.
Great. And so just to finish off, generally about data, what does the data actually tell you? What can you glean from this kind of granular data that's coming through these meters?
Yeah, one of the key areas that you can really kind of enrich your view on your hotel is the data can be used to kind of really understand how energy intensive guests can be. And again, that can drive its own kind of conclusions, etc., as you work it through. But really just understanding how guests are consuming energy within their rooms, within, like I said, the communal areas at your hotels, etc. The other angle you can obviously do as well is you can set this up so that the data can be fed into your building management systems. And again, you can obviously understand from your building management systems if there are any issues on site. A couple of scenarios could be that if you've got a combined heat and power unit and that goes offline, then obviously having the view of that data can then alert you to that issue more quickly than perhaps if you didn't have that. Similarly, with if you've got embedded generation, you might have solar PV panels on your roof, etc. If they are to go offline, then that data is going to let us know much quicker that actually there's an issue, and then the potential interventions or resolution steps can be initiated a lot more quickly than perhaps not having that view initially. So I think the other point I'd make as well, Tim, is when you're committed to reducing consumption, it's important to be able to see how your asset is tracking against these initiatives. So that's another kind of metric or indicator that you can get from the data. It can also provide an element of a view of where you are in terms of some of the processes you've got in situ, if there are some challenges around that, if things are being left on in the kitchen, in the bar areas, etc. So that's quite an important point as well. You can also kind of really understand the difference in behaviours with guests from building to building, which again could be really, really useful. And also if you're part of a hotel chain or portfolio of properties, then being able to benchmark against other hotels in the group can be a useful tool as well.
Great. So that's brilliant. So we understand what's good data, what granular data is, and what it can tell you. So, but how do we get it? How are we going to get at this data? So if we've got a hotel at the moment, and I can see from the poll, and if everybody can interact with the polls, that'd be great. Four respondents don't think they don't know whether they're receiving any good data at all. So how do we ensure that we're getting data for the sites?
Yeah, it comes back to meters really, and I think it's kind of looking at what meters you've got in situ. And whether or not they can be configured to stream the more granular data. And when we say the more granular data, the ideal within the utility space is to aim for half hourly day+1 data. So again, that just gives a much more real-time view of overall asset performance. So meters comes back to that, but also when we talk about meters, we mean the main fiscal meters or the incoming meters for gas and power. So what we've seen as well is certainly the access to things like submeters now are much more available. And I think from that point of view, we can certainly get more granular across the different areas within a hotel through submeters, as well as water. I think that's the point as well. So we can definitely access water in the same way, or water data in the same way that we can for gas and power. So it's important to make sure that we include that, because ultimately that does represent an integral pillar of a viable sustainability strategy moving forward for your hotel. So I think the other element to that as well is obviously once we've got the data through, it's then what we do with that in terms of how we view it. So it's important that you get a solid monitoring and targeting platform that will allow the data to be fed into that. So the monitoring and targeting platform, or M&T platform, will allow you to kind of really deep dive into some of those triggers and alerts that we mentioned earlier about being set. So it's vitally important that you do get a really good, robust platform in place. And that's something that we can help with as well. We've kind of been fortunate enough to be able to develop out some really solid relationships with meter operators and data collectors. And I think that what that does is that yields a real benefit for us, because it means that perhaps rather than being a cost-intensive exercise to get to the core data that you want to, there may be other peripheral things that we can do to try and access a better view of your information. So it's always worth just double checking that and investing a bit of time into partnering with an organisation that can offer that sort of approach when looking to roll out this sustainability strategy.
Okay, great. So metering is the key in order to get this data. Is there a cost associated to metering? We've had a question in from John. He's asking, how much does metering cost? Yeah,
it's a good question. So I think what we've seen with with metering. Recently, we've seen gas and power meters that you can access the half-hourly day plus one data. The cost for that is typically around about £300 per year per meter. For water, unfortunately, it's still quite an expensive approach, but you can get to half-hourly day plus one data through water. So when you're looking at, obviously, like I said, sustainability, leak detection and interventions to reduce water consumption, it's definitely money well spent. And that's around about £1,000 a year for water.
Okay.
For sub-meters, the charge there is around about £150 a year per sub-meter. So, yeah.
So okay, so sub-meters are a lot cheaper, but there's potentially more of them. So okay, so now we've got our meters. We've decided our strategy. We've got our meters. We know we need granular data, and we know what the costs. We're happy with the costs. How do I prioritize? What do I do to understand which ones I should go after? What the data means, and which one should I go after first?
Yeah, it comes right back to what you want to achieve from embarking on a sustainability strategy, I think. And once you've got that fully aligned, where you want to get to, and you've got some initial high-level targets or aspirations that you want to reach or achieve, then it's then, as we mentioned earlier, it's vitally important to get that baseline, that initial view of what we're going to baseline or benchmark against when it comes to looking to reduce carbon emissions and overall consumption. So that would be the first point. The other element to this as well is to make sure that you get a comprehensive energy survey. So we'll cover this more in the green webinar we're going to be doing in a few weeks. But effectively, what the comprehensive energy survey is going to do is, if you get it conducted across the portfolio or your site, you're then able to prioritize initiatives or opportunities on site based around your ROI cycles and also your sign-off processes. So we call them energy conservation measures, or ECMs. And once they're in place and they're set against your baseline, your target, etc., we would then obviously look to build those into your monitoring and targeting platform to be able to then robustly track the savings. And then it's over to you guys to really then shout about those benefits and those savings and everything else, all the good work that you're doing, because ultimately, guests and hotel staff, colleagues and stakeholders are going to be super keen to hear some of the good work that you're doing. The other element to prioritization isn't necessarily around ROIs and spend, etc., but it could be temperature or sort of zonal carbon intensity areas as well that could actually, it could be impacting the guest experience when on site at your hotel. So certainly some of the kind of zones within it could be cold, could be warm, whatever it might be. But ultimately, the guest experience could be being negatively impacted by that. So actually, in terms of prioritizing some of the areas that we're looking to improve upon, then it's elements like that that are really going to be quite powerful when saying, well, okay, what's our top 3 initiatives that we're going to focus on? And actually, it could be that the temperature and the carbon intensity issue could be higher and therefore should take the focus. But again, without that data, we're not going to be able to kind of robustly report on that.
Yeah, and I guess that the customer experience is effectively the income stream of the business. So it's all very well saving costs, but if the customers aren't going to come as a result of their perception of temperature or their perception of comfort, then you've got no income to play those costs against. Okay, so that really interesting, Nick. There's a phrase that keeps coming up in my research around this webinar and generally my kind of asset management hat on in the utilities industry, and it's data analytics. Now, can you just give us a quick lowdown on what data analytics is and what it does?
Absolutely. So data analytics is everything. What we mean by data analytics is basically the conclusions from the data. And those conclusions can be massively powerful because they're fact-based, they're data-driven, and they can be conclusions around behaviors, trends, change management, etc., right across your organization. So they are hugely powerful when looking at a sustainability strategy and more generally trying to optimize the operation as fully as it can be. So I think it's vitally important to be able to, again, look to partner up with somebody that can devise a roadmap around the analytics or the conclusions for your organization. We need to ensure that it's being tied back to your sustainability goals or your objectives as a business. But that's the key, really. Data analytics is everything. Data in itself, obviously, is great. It's useful to a degree, but the analytics piece is the powerful one that's going to be driving continuous improvement, the potential cost savings, and the green credentials significantly increasing within your hotels.
And Nick, is data analytics led by machines or humans, or a bit of both?
So yeah, I mean, data analytics, good question actually. So with the analytics side of things, what we obviously developed out is an opportunity to be able to interrogate the data through a M&T monitoring and targeting platform. So once we've got that data streaming, then we can automate a lot of the process around alerts, triggers, and some of the high level interventions that you can see. So it certainly doesn't depend on somebody within the organization sat at a desk all day monitoring consumption, etc. It's much more remote than that. The system will work for you, but like I said, it will just make sure that it ties back to the right people in your organization to let them know if there is an issue on site that needs to be potentially dealt with.
Okay, so moving on to kind of OPEX, there's some kind of questions around whether OPEX really, whether it really can make a difference to the kind of yield and savings on the portfolio. Can OPEX do it? And have you got any examples of OPEX that can do it?
Yeah, so I mean, OPEX, yeah, massively. So the good thing about OPEX is these reduction initiatives are a really cost-effective way of reducing energy consumption and carbon across the organisation. Through a planned rollout driven by the analytics, some of the energy conservation measures can yield up to potentially 25% in overall reduction, which is a massive saving when you consider that. So it's vitally important when planning a sustainability strategy that these initiatives are validated and factored in, because they are, like I said, a key pillar to achieving your goals.
And examples of that kind of thing, example of the OPEX that you can expend in order to make that 25% difference?
Yeah, so behaviour change programs, really, really impactful way of engaging both guests, staff on how to use gas, power and water across the organisation, how to be much more mindful about communal areas, etc. I think it's important that a lot of these behavioural change initiatives that certainly we've supported organisations on have really kind of not been at the detriment of, again, the overall guest experience. I think that it comes back to that as a really important point. We don't want to obviously make a super efficient hotel, but actually it's freezing cold. So it's important to balance that out. But I think, yeah, certainly behaviour change programs have been a really, really key area. Fault diagnosis can come from the analytics and from an OPEX perspective, things like CHP, combined heat and power units going down, or boilers, can be really costly, not only from an unscheduled maintenance perspective, but being able to jump on that issue quickly is obviously going to be vitally important. But it can also be costly, again, when considering that guest experience piece around, some of the potential negative reviews being left on Trustpilot and TripAdvisor through the fact that actually somewhere was really hot or the room was really cold or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
We've seen a lot of kit being left on. So again, from an OPEX point of view, just only having to wait a few hours to understand spikes in consumption. If out of hours and there's a real surge, then obviously that something isn't quite right there. So I think that's another real benefit or an example where we've seen these kind of initiatives yield some sizable kind of opportunity areas. So the other point I make as well is that we've seen a lot more emergence around visual displays in order to sort of demonstrate or reinforce the message. And one of the best ones I've seen was a polar bear was stood on an ice cap, and if the establishment was running efficiently and everything was good, then the ice cap was nice and solid. It was there, and the polar bear looked really, really happy. But if processes were to go offline and consumption went above a tolerance or below, whatever it might be, then the ice cap actually started to melt. And what happened is that people actually started to get emotionally attached to the polar bear. And what would happen if the ice cap melted fully, then the polar bear would fall into the sea. And nobody wanted to do that. So nobody wanted to see that happen. So from a kind of perspective of rallying around and getting people really bought into this, something just as simple as that was just a really powerful way. And like I said, guests related to it, staff related to it, actually, giving the polar bear a name and things like that. So it's just a simple way, but an absolutely effective way of crystallizing what you're trying to do. So, certainly worth considering something along those lines as well.
Yeah, and it makes total sense, doesn't it? It relates your own personal behaviour to something that's a lot bigger and a lot greater in terms of the world, and people really do feel that, especially when they see the plastic bottles in the oceans that actually have the brands of the water company that they actually use. That relationship becomes much more real, and behaviour changes very quickly as a result of that, as opposed to trying to drag people along. So I can see how that would be really, really impactful, and a great idea. So let's harness our inner salt and pepper and talk about tech again. How can tech help?
Well, I think certainly we've seen technology advance the potential of accessing data. We've got better metering and sub-metering capability than we've ever had. It's now more cost effective than it's ever been as well, which is obviously a huge benefit. From a monitoring and targeting platform, some of the functionality now that we're able to access is better and more insightful than it ever has been previously. So again, those advancements through technology are just adding more and more benefit to an overall sustainability strategy when looking to join the dots up around how you can optimize the potential within your running operation, as it were. So that would be a couple of points I'd raise there. The other element is obviously around the Internet of Things, so IoT. This is kind of uncharted territory for us in the sense of we're seeing capturing data through the enablement of connected devices, and then being able to drive analytics based on that data and those connected devices and what that's telling you. So it's had a massive influence on data and an overriding sustainability strategy from an OPEX perspective too.
Brilliant. So that kind of polishes OPEX off. Let's just have a very quick look at CAPEX. How could data help drive the business case for CAPEX?
It's important to kind of look at the CAPEX element. I think people immediately think when you go for an energy survey, the first thing you're going to be told is that you need to spend X thousand, 100,000, £1 million to save X amount over a sort of 10, 15-year period. Well, I mean, that's like I said, that's a part of the overall sustainability kind of business case, as it were. But I think what you need to be able to do is fundamentally understand the investment as deeply as possible, and that comes through data. So we use a kind of a series of kind of interventions and stuff along the way. But the best way that we've crystallized this is through a Six Sigma approach, which is called the DMAIC approach, which really does summarize it brilliantly, which is to define the initial point of where you are, etc., measure that, and then obviously analyze what that's telling you, implement or improve and implement there, and then obviously control that improvement. So from an ROI payback point of view, you're validating it through the robust information through sort of business case planning cycles and everything. So it's absolutely fundamental.
Yeah, and that's really important when you've got an FD breathing down your neck saying, where's the return on this CAPEX? Where's the return on this CAPEX? You need the data to back up your case to prove that the actual money's been spent in the right way. So that's kind of important. What about the savings being more sustainable? Can you measure them going into the future and measure how continuously sustainable they are?
Yeah, you've got your baseline of where you started your journey, and obviously as you're introducing the energy conservation measures along the way and the various initiatives to improve your overall performance when it comes to carbon emissions and energy reduction. As long as the data is flowing, then the benefits are being captured, and I think that's the key point. So once you've got that, the analytics are not only going to drive the conclusions around business cases, but also in terms of capital works, scheduled maintenance, refits, retrofits, cycles across your hotel or your portfolio of hotels. It's a really clear way of being able to understand that. So absolutely, savings are sustainable and continuous as long as you're getting that granular data stream.
Brilliant, Nick. Thanks. That's been really interesting. I know it's been pretty data heavy, but the clean element of the trilemma really is about getting your data in order, to enable yourself to move on to the clean or the green element that's going to be covered in the next webinar. So in conclusion, I think we are pretty convinced that you need to get metered. You need to validate the current situation and set a base level to drive your improvements. I think you need to factor in operational data requirements into a building design and construction contract. Don't leave it until you've got the building to then try and retrofit or find out what information the building is going to give you. Go into the contract managers, go into the designers, the M&E designers, and demand the data that you want out of the system rather than the other way around. And then minimize the risk of errors by getting the data in place, by getting robust data in place, so you can fault find early. You can really make a difference to the consumption and improve your RI and your kind of rental take. There's a poll on the website now. If you click there to find out more about what Amber Energy does, that would be great. Thanks so much for joining us. Remember to tune into our final webinar in the series focusing on the green point of the trilemma, which is scheduled for the 8th of April. Thank you for all your participation in the polls and the questions, and we'll see you next time. Say goodbye, Nick.
Thanks all.
Thank you very much, and goodbye.